All right, so let's get started. I know two people aren't coming today. Let's see. So I have Sharon, I have Alice, I have Libby, I have Terry, and I have Lucero. So the only one we're missing is Beth. Debbie's mother-in-law passed away, so she couldn't come.
Oh.
And Claire had a scheduling snafu and couldn't make it. So if Beth pops on, great. And if not, we'll just send her a recap. So this is your class. You tell me what you want to do today. What would we like to review today? What can I help you with so that you can get ready for whatever you want to do at your Seder table? And everybody brought their Haggadah like I asked, right? Amazing. Good, good, good. So were you able to find the pieces that I recorded for you in your Haggadah?
Yes.
Okay, Sharon, you're muted. I can't hear you. I see your lips moving.
Here we go. When you say your Haggadah, do you mean what you sent that we should download, or our personal Haggadah?
The personal one. The one I sent to download was just because Alice had asked for it because she thought it was beautiful and all that. You didn't have to download it. It's a Chabad. It's a Chabad book.
I noticed.
And so, you know, I mean, it had a lot of great information on how to prepare for Pesach and all of that at the very beginning. I thought that was interesting, but
I copied some of that. Okay, well, excuse me while I go to two rooms down and get my own.
Okay. We'll be here.
Are the Haggadahs all the same? Let's say like I have this one and I have this one.
Well, they're mostly the same. And that's why I tried to pick, when I picked the first few things to do, I picked ones that are hopefully in every Haggadah. So they should be in every Haggadah. Some Haggadahs abbreviate, so they take things out. But I don't think that, I think Chad Gadya, the four sons, and Avadim Hayinu are in every Haggadah. So, and Karpas, what else did we do last week? Karpas, the 10 plagues, and there was a third thing that we did. What was it? Let me open up my document. We had Karpas. We had, oh, my mouse is not cooperating. Come on, Mr. Mouse. We had Karpas, we had, the bitter herbs, the Hillel sandwich, and the Omer. The Omer might not be in every Haggadah, but I just thought it would be, something interesting and new for some people. So Karpas, you're going to find in your Haggadah, there's an order to every Seder, right? I don't know if you guys, at the beginning of our Seder, and again, my parents are secular Israelis, so a lot of what we do is based on a secular Israeli. At the very beginning of the Seder, we sing the whole order, right? Which is here. I don't know if you can see it. But so it's Kadesh Uchatz Karpas Yachatz Mageed Rachza Motzi Matzah, and then it goes on to the whole thing. So Kadesh is reciting the first Kiddush. Urchatz, which is the next one, is washing your hands, and that's the washing your hands where you don't necessarily get up and go to the sink. You usually do just something where you bring a pitcher around to the table and do just the tips of your fingers. Then the third thing is Karpas. So it's going to be towards the very beginning of your Haggadah, because right? Okay, you found it. Perfect. There you go. And then Yachatz is breaking the middle matzah. The next one's Mageed, and that's where you're going to find the 4 questions. The Mageed starts with the 4 questions. It answers with Avadim Hayinu. It goes into the 4 sons. So and the Mageed is probably the longest part of the Haggadah because it tells the story and it talks about the traditional text, tells the story, and then talks about what the rabbis in the Talmud thought of the telling of the story, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. And traditionally, you're supposed to, you're really supposed to, during Mageed, ask a lot of questions and try to poke holes, almost like the rabbis did in that time of the Talmud around the table. So it's supposed to go on for a longer period of time than it does, because everybody's hungry by then, and we want to get on with the food part. Because if you're starting, we usually don't start till candle lighting. So if you're starting at 7:30, by the time, even if you rush through the Mageed, you get through, it's now 8:30, 8:45, and you're starving. And to have like this 7-course meal, you know, with an egg and a gefilte fish and a soup and a, you know, whatever, it takes quite a long time, especially if you have kids at the table. So, you know, so people will, we have at times, when I used to host the Seder, say to everyone, and depending on their age group, I would say, bring an article or, you know, download an article from, you know, a current article that has something to do with Pesach, right? So this year it would be pretty easy to talk about oppression in Ukraine and things like that, or freedom for the refugees that have fled Ukraine and things like that. You know, sometimes, you know, they'll bring a story about a plague, which we have that too. So there's plenty of things to talk about. And sometimes I would say, okay, you know, we'd go through the Mageed, and then as we were serving dinner, I would say, okay, and I would call on the kids, you know, to ask them to get up and read their article and talk about how it was, you know, related to Pesach. And that way the parents could eat their gefilte fish and their soup while, you know, because the kids are usually like, we don't want any of this. We just want the main dish. So, so you have to be creative, but, and then after Mageed, you actually ritually wash your hands with a blessing, then motzi matzah, you say the hamotzi, and then it's maror, korech, shulchan orech. Maror and korech are the things that I gave you, the maror and the Hillel sandwich. And then you get to the meal. So I tried to give you those things that I know are, you know, that I know are steps that people take in the Seder. That's a long answer to the question. So if you're having trouble finding in your Haggadah, let me know. If there's other stuff in your Haggadah that you know you say, we can kind of go over it and what it is and why and all that. And I can certainly record it. Libby, did you want me to record the 4 questions for you?
I've been trying to practice all week. I could try even now, but yes, if you want to, that would be great.
Okay, so I'll record the 4 questions for you. I think that's
Okay.
amazing.
Okay.
I'm gonna write that down. And that way, as you're running around doing your errands, you just have it on.
Right.
Okay. Alice, how'd you do with the Chad Gadya? Was that okay? Was that what you wanted?
Yeah, it was, yes, it was very good. I enjoyed getting through it.
Yeah, it's Aramaic, it's hard, and it doesn't really rhyme, but it's like sometimes a tongue twister. I think I had to tape it twice because I couldn't quite get it right the first time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. You know, it's different when you have that.
Right. And oh, by the way, usually when I'm reading it, I'm probably half drunk, but that's because it's at the very end of the Seder after you've had all these 4 cups of wine. So, yeah, so I, doing it sober was a totally different experience for me. Not that I get drunk, but you know, if I have 2 glasses of wine, that's it for me for the night. So 4 and forget it.
What are the 4 sons? I don't follow that.
the four sons, if you go to the Mageed part of your Seder, where you have the four questions, then you have, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, the Avadim Hayinu, which I read. 2 or 3 paragraphs later, you've got the wise child asks, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I taped for you. Chacham mahu omer, and all of that. And then the contrary child, Rasha mahu omer. And just so you know, in Hebrew, Rasha means wicked, not contrary. But my Haggadah translates it as contrary. And then the simple son, which is Tam mahu omer. And the child that doesn't know how to ask is Veshe'eno yodea lish'ol. So those are the ones I taped for you. I taped and that's why I gave you the verbiage that I was reading. I gave you, this is the Fortunoff Haggadah from, however many years ago, because Fortunoff's hasn't been around in 20 years here in the East Coast. Matter of fact, let's see what the copyright 1993. So it's been a while, but that just happens to be the Haggadah my family used. So I used it. So hopefully it's the same traditional language that's in yours. If you've got something different and you want to scan it for me, I'll be happy to tape it for you.
Ellie Wiesel did a tape on YouTube, a Pesach, where a family is doing Pesach, the Seder.
Nice.
And it was good to watch. And he mentioned that the last song was actually symbolic of, I don't remember now, but it said it was symbolic of, the tragedies of life.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is like I'll just read the English of the last stanza. This is a song kind of like the 12 days of Christmas, where you kind of go through it backwards, right? So this is, then came the Holy One, blessed be he, who slew the angel of death, that killed the shochet, that slaughtered the ox, that drank the water, that quenched the fire, that burned the stick, that beat the dog, that bit the cat, that ate the goat that my father bought for 2 zuzim. So it's one of these Jewish tragedies of oh my, look what happened to me. It's a country song. It's a country Western song. You know what I mean? Like just, first my girlfriend left me, then my dog died, and this, that, the other. And it's our Jewish spin on it, we sometimes focus when we talk about Pesach on all the, instead of focusing on redemption and, getting out of Egypt, we focus on how hard we worked in Egypt and how we were slaves there. And we eat the bitter herbs, and we eat the charoset, and we shouldn't forget that at one point we were slaves. And this kind of, sums it up. Like, we had a hard life,
Mhm.
So yeah.
I thought that the last one, the son who cannot ask, I thought that refers to a challenged child or special needs. That's what I thought.
Yeah, it could. I mean, listen, we have so many different interpretations of these things. But yeah, I mean, it could be a child. It's not that he doesn't know how to ask. Maybe he doesn't know how to ask the right question or the right way to ask, or right. So it could be. I mean, every year we used to, with there's 4 of us kids, and so every year we used to kind of fight who's which son and that sort of thing. And we always used to call my little brother Josh the simple child, because he was just he was quiet. And in the meantime, Josh, got a perfect score on his SATs. He went to Cooper Union. He got his doctorate at Yale. He's a professor at Tufts. He's the youngest tenured professor at Tufts University. He's working on, his lab works on studying proteins and their effects on Alzheimer's disease. He's the next Jonas Salk of our century. And every year we're like, he's the simple one. In the meantime, he was the wise one. And he stayed quiet because he was learning. He was like soaking it all in like a sponge. and he's the youngest. So, you know, so that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, and you know, and that's why when we say the Rasha, the wicked son, they've changed that to the contrary son, right? And you know, and we can always say like that sometimes really smart kids are the ones that ask a lot of questions, or, you know, but why, right? Why is the sky blue? Well, you know, it reflects off the water and blah, blah, blah. Well, we live in the middle of the country, but why? Like, you know, it's the but why, you know, and that child might be the contrary child. And, you know, when my daughter was in kindergarten, the kindergarten teacher said to me that, you know, she's very, very bright, very sharp. And what was the word she used? I can't remember. And I said, okay, so what does that mean? She said, well, in kindergarten, it means nothing. She said, but I'm just telling you, it's going to be how she's going to become a fine young lady. Nobody's going to tell her what to do. She's going to always stand her ground. You know, she's going to really be a great young lady. She said, but it's going to be hell to raise her to that point. And, you know, because she was always, you know, always questioning and always wanting to know why. And, you know, you have to go to bed now. Why? You know, I'm like, I'm going to strangle her. I'm like, because it's 7:30 or 8 o'clock and it's your bedtime. Right. But why is that? You know, like all of a sudden she'd be asking one night, why is her bedtime 8 o'clock? You know? So, you know, and then there's the smart aleck kid who always knows everything. And is that the person that really knows everything? You know, because like I said, the Seder table is the place where you're supposed to ask questions and you're supposed to think outside the box, like these rabbis did, right? Like, you know, I'm just going to flip to something right in the thing. You know, and they tormented us, as it is written, and they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with their burdens. I'm looking for the rabbi's commentary here. Where is it? Like even after, okay, so a famous one is after the 10 plagues, when they say, you know, well, if you had 10 plagues, you know, one rabbi says if you had 10 plagues, and they were smitten with, you know, wrath, indignation, and trouble, and messengers of evil, then it was 4 times the 10 plagues, making it 40 plagues. And if you know, and if you add it to the last interpretation that this rabbi said, then there really were 200 plagues. And they like go back and forth and talk about like, you know, all of this stuff. And so when it comes to that, you know, sometimes we'll say, okay, so who agrees with this rabbi? Who agrees with that rabbi? And try and discuss it a little bit more.
That's good.
You know, I mean, like I said, we've done, depending on the age of the kids, we've done quite a number of things over the years. One year I asked everybody, we have a lot of boy grandchildren. My mother has 11 grandchildren and 3 of them are girls and the rest are boys. So one year I said, okay, I want everyone to make something from the Haggadah out of Legos. And the kids that went to Jewish day school, I gave them a passage of what to make. The other kids that didn't go to Jewish day school, I told them they could pick anything they wanted, any plague, anything. And they made their little thing out of Legos and we put them, you know, on it. We had a side table and we put them on the side table and everybody presented it as we got to their place in the Haggadah, and you know, everybody was thrilled. So, you know, it depends on the age of the kids.
That's really cool.
You know?
Yeah,
Yeah. I always give my Seder guests homework, you know, like if I'm preparing for the Seder, they should prepare for the Seder. And like I said, the easy one is find a current event article that relates to Pesach in some way, shape, or form. And let's see what you bring, you know? So I also, a lot of people don't believe in it, but if you look up, and it's usually on a Christian website, but if you look up the scientific explanation behind the 10 plagues, you'll find articles, and like I said, they're mostly on Christian websites, that will talk about the first plague being blood is actually like a red algae that that took over the Nile River. And there's, you know, scientific proof that there was this red algae that was infected by either a high heat or something like that. And then because there was too much red algae in the Nile River, the frogs jumped out of the river. Right. And because the frogs jumped out of the river and they were living on the land as opposed to in the river where they're supposed to be living, here come the flies and the lice and all of that come. And like I said, you know, a lot of rabbis are like, yeah, we don't believe in that type of thing. But I happen to think that there might be a scientific fact to it. Maybe God made it harder and worse than it would have been. And maybe God started the whole ball rolling, you know, with all the plagues. But hold on, I'm looking for my 10 plagues so I can, oh, here they are. So after lice was wild beasts. And so the lice infected the big animals too. And those animals became infected and they became sick as well. And leading to the pestilence. With all this sickness in the air and with, you know, frogs and lice and whatever, people ended up getting boils on their face because now they had this, you know, this dirty, you know, part to their skin. Hailstorm, you know, is something that we see often. And after the hailstorm to have locusts, every couple of years, you'll hear in the Middle East that there's a locust issue where they have a swarm of locusts or an outbreak. And, you know, darkness is one of those things I can't really explain. It could be an eclipse, it could be whatever. But how was the darkness only on the Egyptians and not on the Jews? So I think God had to have a hand in that. And then the slaying of the firstborn makes a lot of sense. If you had all of this sickness and this hail that came down, you know, the piles of grain that they used to take their food from, the oldest always got the first share. So whatever sickness was on top is what the firstborn was taking and getting for their families. And that's how they were dying. So it's you know, if you look it up, you'll find, like I said, mostly on Christian websites. But I think it's fascinating. So sometimes I bring that to the Seder table and we talk about it. And do you think God had a hand in it? Do you think God didn't have a hand in it? You know, everybody around the table has a different belief in God and, you know, how that works. So, you know, anything else Hebrew wise you need help with? Or do you have enough to review and do? I mean, like I said, you don't have to do any of this. If you're so busy doing whatever, you don't have to do any of this. This is just, I wanted you guys to have the knowledge to be able to read at your own Seder, but it's what you make of it. And then when we get back together on the 24th, which is our next class in 2 weeks, because next week is Pesach, then we'll go back to the book. And it seems like we have 35 pages left of the book, but really we're going to fly through them. Because it's mostly, there's a couple of new letters, but it's mostly getting our reading in, right? And doing a lot of reading. So our classes will probably be, again, like, you know, 30 to 45 minutes with more time to read after class. And I'm going to try to preempt by taping the classes, taping the pages beforehand, so you don't have to wait till Wednesday to get them. And I'll send as many as I can Sunday night after our class, so we have them.
How much time do you recommend that we put in, like once a week, every day, 5 minutes, half an hour?
You know, the more you put in, the better you're going to be, right? With a language, it's like, you know, math and languages, the more time you put in. If you put in 5 minutes a day, that's great. If you can only get to it once a week, try to put in, you know, 20 minutes, you know. but how much time you're going to put in is what you're going to get out of it, to be honest. You know, if you have the time to put in 10 minutes a day, that's fantastic. You know, when I'm reviewing, like I'm reading Torah on the 30th of April, and I already printed out what I'm reading. I try to go through it, 10 minutes a day. And as I get closer, 20 minutes a day, to make sure I know what I'm, that I've reviewed it enough and know what I'm doing. But it's also based on the time that you have during the week. So, if you don't practice, then you're going to be completely lost after, I'm sure, as you've realized, we've already had how many classes. So, you'll be lost after a few weeks, but you can catch up. It's not, again, it's about putting the time in. So, I would say minimum twice a week, 10 minutes twice a week. But the more time you have to dedicate it to it, anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes a day, that's great. So.
I find sometimes that I'm mentally fatigued,
Yeah.
and it's just hard to.
And as we learn more letters, it's harder. Like the Vav and the Resh look alike, and the Zayin and the Zayin and the Vav kind of look the same with the tail, and the Bet and the Bet and the Chaf look the same. So, as we're getting into the harder stuff, then, it's getting harder. So.
Lymor, I have a question. I think there are 3 ways that we would read Hashem or Adonai. What are the 3 different ways
So
for the letters?
the Yud, right, where you see the Yud,
Yes,
that is pronounced Adonai.
right. And is that the most common? Is that the one that we use that's mostly used?
There's also Yud Hey Vav Hey. That's another one. That's Adonai. That's more in the Chumash than the Sidur. In the Sidur, you're going to see Yud more. In the Chumash, you're going to see Yud Hey Vav Hey more.
Okay.
And then you have the word Adonai, which means God also. And like we've seen on some of our practice sheets where they have a hey with an apostrophe on it, that's also Adonai, but they don't want to write out Adonai. So they do this, they do this abbreviation. So I think those are it. Like I said, in the Sidur, you're going to see Adonai, and you're going to see Yud. And in the Chumash and in the Tanakh, like in the Torah, you're going to see more Yud Hey Vav Hey. Although you'll see Adonai and you'll see Yud, but more, it's more Yud Hey Vav Hey.
What is the Chumash?
Chumash is the 5 books of the Torah. Like that red book in
Pentateuch.
Shul, the red book in Shul that you have.
Yeah,
That
so
has
it's the Pentateuch.
the Pentateuch, right? Yes.
And there are so many different versions of the there are many of them. The Stone edition is one that I happen to like, but it's just only one. There are many.
Yeah. I have the old JPS one, which I happen to like.
The Hertz one was also very popular many years ago in the conservative shuls. I don't think it's used anymore.
No. I mean, and remember, now there's more general neutral language. We say God instead of him, and that sort of thing. And so it's so when they come out with new publications, they try to do that, and they also try to lighten some of the harsher material, right? Because there is some pretty harsh material in there. So they try to translate it differently so that it's not as hurtful to some people and that sort of thing. But the Hebrew is the Hebrew. So fortunately or unfortunately, like I said, you know, in our Haggadah, it says the contrary, son, but the word Rasha means wicked. You know, Haman, in the book of Esther, Haman was Rasha, Haman was wicked.
Right.
And so, you know, to try and think of your own child as wicked is, you know, not, you know, again, not something that a mother does, you know, that a parent does ever, you know. And when you think of children, you know, a 4-year-old can't be wicked, right? Like there's
They're never wicked.
right.
Inquisitive.
Right. And they might be high strung energy, whatever, but, you know, and they may lash out or something like that, but they're not wicked, right? There's not, you know, they're not bad apples. You can't have a
Right.
bad apple at 4 years old. It just doesn't, you know, at least how I believe, like, you know,
Absolutely.
you can definitely behavior change at that age. So, you know, and even older. So, so some of our ancient beliefs and feelings, you know, it's very hard in 2022 to really, you know, to really understand it. Like you were saying, Libby, like that, the child who doesn't know how to ask. You know, 30 years ago, we didn't really know about, you know, the autism spectrum, right? Like we knew harsh autism, like in the movie Rain Man, where he was catatonic or he was, you know, so smart beyond belief, but had no other. But now there's a whole spectrum, including the Asperger spectrum, which, you know, which gives you this, you know, which gives you all of these things. I mean, like, you know, even dyslexia 30 years ago was not really commonly diagnosed. You know, my
Right,
brother-in-law
absolutely.
was dyslexic. He is, if I'm 50, he's 48. And he went to school his whole life, like, you know, thinking everything looked so backwards to him, and he had to train his brain to learn things backwards. And it wasn't until he went to college, but he dropped out. He never graduated because it was just too hard for him. And now he realizes that, like, wait a minute, I think I have dyslexia and I'm, you know, in my 40s. So, you know, we just didn't have that
On a
back
Zoom
then.
class.
So, you know,
I'll talk to you.
so it's just interesting how we
I
look
have
at the world.
one more question, Lymor. I'm sorry. One
Yeah.
more question.
As many as you want.
Thank you. Okay, we just said a few minutes ago that there are many different chamashim, and they could all be a little bit different. What about the Torahs now that are in, let's say, an Orthodox shul, or Torahs in a conservative shul, or in a Reform? Are the Torahs all exactly
The
alike?
Hebrew, and even in the Chumash, the Hebrew is the
The
same.
same. Okay, thank you.
Unless you see it say on the Chumash that it's an abridged edition of some sort or something like that, but which is rare. But every Chumash and every Torah is going to be the traditional language.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a general question. What is the difference between the Talmud and the Zohar?
Oh, well, the Talmud is the explanation, the 13th or so century and more explanation of the Torah and the Chumash, right? And the laws and that sort of thing. The Zohar is actually part of the Kabbalah, which is the mystical. There are, I don't know how many mystical books, but that's kind of an aside. You know, the Talmud's in the south, and so is the Zohar, but they're not on each other, right? So the Zohar is the mystical piece, the Kabbalah piece. My son could tell you how many books there are in the Kabbalah, because that's something he
I
was
think they're
very
about
interested in.
20 plus.
Are there? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a shelf full of them, but you know, beginning to end. But I just, you know.
So there's a very interesting one of the books of the Kabbalah, and I don't remember which, talk about the Hebrew letters and how they're formed and what they mean. And it's really interesting. Maybe, if we have time at the end, maybe I'll bring a few letters and you'll see. But basically, like the bet, right? The bet is this letter, and the bet is open on one side because you should always keep your home open to guests, right? So, right. So it's very lovely. So just things like that of every letter and how they're formed and what they are, and, but all very interpretive, just like the Talmud is, and just like the Kabbalah is very interpretive by the rabbis that wrote it. And even like the commentary you see in the Chumash, or when your rabbi gets up and talks about the Parsha, there's different ways of looking at things. And it's one reason that we read the Torah over and over and over every year, because there's always something to learn from it and always something to take away from it. And same thing with the Talmud. You could go through there's a Daf Yomi, where you read 1 page a day of the Talmud, and it takes 7.5 years to read it. And I think we started in January 2020 reading it. So we're 2 and a little bit 2.25 years in now of a 7.5 year cycle. So there's a lot, there's a lot to learn. And I do study Daf Yomi, and when I do, there are days where I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could learn more about this, right? And I write it down in the hopes that later on I'll go back to it. And I never have time to go back to it because there's always another day of the page to do.
That takes a lot of discipline.
It is a lot of discipline. There are weeks where on Saturday I'm actually reading 3 pages, 4 pages, because I'm catching up. I mean, it's inevitable. It's funny. Yesterday afternoon, I sat down and I was like, oh, I just have today's page to read because I was actually caught up this week. So, that was kind of nice, because usually Saturday afternoon, that's kind of my afternoon activity, if I'm not napping, is to kind of catch up on it. There's also another cycle called, I want to say 929, which is the 929 chapters of the Bible, of the five books. That just started recently, a few weeks ago. And you can study one chapter of the I think it's the Torah. Maybe it's the Tanakh. No, it's got to be the Torah. Every day for however many years, 929 days, so 3.5 years, almost 3 years.
Is Tanakh and Chumash the same thing?
So the Chumash is just the Torah, the 5 books. The Tanakh stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So that's all the 5 books of the Torah, the Navi books, meaning like Judges and Samuel and Joshua, like all the prophets. And the Ketuvim are 30 books, and it's like Ecclesiastes and Psalms and Proverbs and all of those books. So
it's just that I hear these words all the time, but I never really knew specifically, what's what.
Right. So if you go to Jewish day school, you'll learn a lot of Navi, a lot of the prophets. And the Haftorahs that you get every week are mostly from Navi, but sometimes from the Ketuvim, sometimes from the writings. So, and then you have the Talmud, which is basically the interpretation of all of those things. And that is, there are 6 sidrot, 6 sidrei Mishnah. There's 6 volumes. And within each volume, I don't even know how many books there are and chapters within the books, but
in the Talmud.
Right. So there's a lot to study. If you're interested, there is so much to study. You start little by little by going to classes with your rabbi, or, classes that are interesting through Women's League or whatever. I mean, when Women's League, we do a study every Tuesday and Wednesday at noon we study, on Wednesday, we study Proverbs, the book of Proverbs. And on Tuesday, we're studying Mishnat Pesach, apropos. And just kind of, we don't even do like, it's not even a chapter a day or anything like that. It's however many phrases we get through, you know what I mean? Which is kind of nice because whoever's teaching it kind of explains it. And at the end, you can ask questions. And if you want to stay on past the time of the class to ask questions, they're always ready to stay on with you. And, you know, interesting stories come up, interesting things. There's probably anywhere between 50 to 100 people on the call every day. So, you know, it's kind of nice. But I take my lunch hour to do that. It's Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Friday they do Parshat Shavua. So most days I do it. And sometimes I can't at work take the time, but most days I do it. It's just some, you know, again, I like learning in different fashions. So that's kind of nice. Okay. If there's no more questions, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to record the Mani Shana for you, Libby. I'll send it to everybody so you all have it. But if anything comes up this week, just drop me an email or a text and let me know. And I'm happy to record something else for you. I'm happy to help you find something in your Haggadah. We'll FaceTime and you'll show me your Haggadah. We'll figure it out. So let me know.
Thank you.
Passover.
Here.
All right. Have a great Passover. Have a
Passover.
kosher and a Zis and Pesach, everyone.